My name is Kevin. I've worked hotel security for a little over 8 years, and I've learned that the biggest problems almost never come from the guests. They come from the people who know how hotels operate after everyone goes to sleep. This happened in the spring of 2023 while I was working overnight security at a 7-story business hotel outside Dallas. It wasn't a luxury hotel, but it stayed busy during the week because of nearby offices. The conference center was undergoing renovations, so one side of the building was closed off after 8 p.m. Contractors had access during the day, but by midnight, everyone was supposed to be gone. I was the only security guard on duty from midnight until 6 in the morning. My routine never changed. Walk every floor, check every emergency exit, inspect the conference center, watch the cameras, repeat. Around 12:50 a.m., I finished my first patrol and was sitting in the security office when the front desk agent called me. "Kevin, could you check the east parking lot? A guest says someone was looking through the windows of their truck." That wasn't unusual. We'd had people wandering onto the property before, especially on weekends. I grabbed my flashlight and headed outside. The parking lot was quiet. I checked every row, nothing. As I walked back toward the hotel, I noticed the construction gate behind the conference center wasn't completely closed. It was only open a few inches. At first, I figured one of the contractors forgot to latch it. I secured it and didn't think much more about it. About 20 minutes later, I was reviewing cameras when the same gate alarm activated. I pulled up the camera. The gate was closed. No one around it. I assumed the wind had shaken it enough to trigger the sensor. Then I noticed something else. A service door leading into the conference center had opened for just 3 seconds. It closed before I could switch cameras. No employee badge had been used. That immediately got my attention. I radioed the front desk and asked if maintenance was in the building. "No," they answered. I headed toward the conference center. Everything looked normal. The service hallway was empty. The meeting rooms were locked. Nothing appeared disturbed. I was about to leave when I smelled cigarette smoke. That stood out immediately because smoking anywhere inside the hotel was strictly prohibited. The smell was fresh. Someone had been there recently. I checked every nearby room. Nothing. The smell slowly faded. I went back to the office and noted it in my report. About 15 minutes later, another call came from the front desk. A guest on the 5th floor reported hearing someone trying several room door handles. That was a much bigger problem. I took the elevator upstairs. The hallway was empty. As I walked past room 527, I noticed tiny scratches around the electronic lock. Fresh ones, like someone had been trying to pry at it with something metal. I knocked on the guest's door. They answered immediately. The man inside looked nervous. He told me he'd heard someone stop at 3 different rooms before trying his handle. He looked through the peephole, but whoever it was had already moved away. I checked both ends of the hallway. Nobody. Then I remembered something. The service elevator. Guests couldn't access it, but it stopped on every floor behind the housekeeping rooms. I hurried downstairs and checked the service corridor cameras. There he was. A man wearing a dark hoodie and a baseball cap. Not running, just walking. He carried a small backpack and kept looking over his shoulder. Before I could zoom in, he pushed through a service door leading into the conference center renovation area. I radioed dispatch immediately and requested police. Then I headed toward the conference center, but this time I stayed near the entrance instead of walking inside. Company policy was clear. If you know someone's hiding in a large building, you don't go hunting for them by yourself. You wait for backup. As I watched the entrance, I heard a fire door open somewhere inside the renovation area. A few seconds later, the alarm reset. Then another door opened on the opposite side of the building. Whoever was inside knew exactly how the service hallways connected. Every time I moved toward one exit, another door alarm activated somewhere else. He wasn't trapped. He was watching how I responded. That's when I stopped chasing the alarms. Instead, I stayed where I could see the only vehicle entrance to the construction area. About 10 minutes later, police arrived. Together we searched the renovation site. Most of it was empty, but inside an unfinished storage room, officers found a backpack hidden behind drywall. Inside were gloves, a flashlight, bolt cutters, hotel master key blanks, and handwritten notes. The notes weren't about guests. They were about employees, shift changes, housekeeping schedules, when security usually walked each floor, even where I parked my patrol cart. The detective looked at me and asked one question. "How long have you been working nights here?" I told him about 8 months. He nodded and said they believed the suspect had probably visited the property several times before choosing that night to break in. He wasn't wandering around by accident. He'd been studying routines. A week later, detectives identified him. He'd been arrested before for breaking into hotels that were under renovation. He'd hide inside unfinished areas until after midnight, learn employee routines over several nights, then steal laptops, wallets, and maintenance keys before slipping out before sunrise. The scary part wasn't that he got away. The scary part was realizing I'd probably walked past him on previous shifts without ever knowing he was there. Now, whenever I work a property that's under construction, I don't assume an unlocked door is just someone forgetting to lock up. Sometimes it's the first sign that somebody has been watching the building a lot longer than you've been watching them. My name is Rick. I've worked private security for just over 7 years now, and I've been posted at everything from apartment complexes to construction sites. Most overnight shifts are exactly what you'd expect. Walk a few patrols, write reports, drink too much coffee, and try not to fall asleep around 4 in the morning. The story I'm about to tell happened last winter, and it's the only shift that's ever made me seriously consider quitting. At the time, my company had just picked up a contract for a distribution warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio. The place stored expensive electronics before they were shipped to retailers, so security was taken pretty seriously. The property sat at the end of a long industrial road with nothing around it except other empty warehouses. Once the nearby businesses closed for the night, the whole area became completely deserted. On weekdays, there were usually 2 guards working overnight. That Friday, the other guard called in sick. My supervisor asked if I could handle the shift alone. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I'd worked the site for almost 6 months and knew the place better than anyone, so I agreed. My shift started at 11 p.m. The first few hours were completely normal. Around 1:20 in the morning, I finished my perimeter patrol, checked every exterior door, and headed back to the security office. About 5 minutes later, one of the motion alarms activated near Dock 9. That wasn't unusual. Stray cats and even deer had triggered those sensors before. I pulled up the camera. Nothing. No movement. No animal. I zoomed in and watched for about 30 seconds before clearing the alarm. Honestly, I didn't think much of it. Maybe the wind moved something. About 10 minutes later, the exact same sensor went off again. This time, I stayed on the camera longer. Still nothing. I remember joking to myself that maintenance was going to hear about another faulty sensor. Then another alert came in. Different location. Loading dock 12, only about 70 feet from the first one. Now I started paying attention. The cameras covering dock 12 looked normal too. No vehicles, no people, nothing moving. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to take another walk outside. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and there was frost covering most of the pavement. As I walked toward the loading docks, my flashlight caught something I hadn't noticed before. Boot prints, fresh ones. They started near one of the emergency exits and disappeared around the corner of the building. I crouched down for a closer look. The strange part wasn't the footprints themselves. It was that I hadn't seen them during my patrol less than 20 minutes earlier. Someone had been there after I'd already checked the area. I radioed dispatch and let them know I was investigating possible trespassing. They told me to call back if I found anyone. I followed the prints around the corner. They ended at the fence. No damaged fencing, no ladder, nothing. It honestly made no sense. I walked the entire perimeter one more time and didn't find another thing. By 2:10, I was back in the security office, convincing myself I was overthinking it. Then I heard the access control system beep. One of the emergency exit doors had been opened. I immediately looked at the monitor. The door opened, closed, then opened again, like someone couldn't decide whether to come inside or leave. I switched to the camera covering that hallway. The door was slowly swinging shut. Nobody was there. At first I thought maybe it hadn't latched correctly after my patrol. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The door wasn't opening by itself. The push bar on the inside was moving. Someone was pressing it just enough to crack the door open, then letting it close again. Whoever was doing it knew exactly where the camera couldn't see. I picked up my radio and told dispatch I believed someone was inside the building. They said deputies were already on the way, but were at least 20 minutes out. That suddenly felt like a very long time. Company policy said not to search the building alone, so I stayed in the security office and watched every camera. For nearly 5 minutes. Nothing happened. I actually started feeling a little embarrassed. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the door mechanism was failing. Then I noticed movement. Not on the hallway camera. On one of the warehouse cameras. Way in the back. Someone ducked behind a stack of pallets. I only caught him for maybe a second. Dark hoodie, dark pants, no reflective vest, no employee badge, just enough to know someone was definitely there. I announced over the building speakers that police had been notified and that they needed to leave immediately. No response. The warehouse stayed completely quiet. Then, every warehouse camera went black. Not the whole system, just the cameras covering the storage area. The office cameras still worked. The parking lot cameras still worked. Only the warehouse. At that point, I locked the security office door. I wasn't about to go wandering through 60,000 square feet of shelving by myself. About 2 minutes later, I heard something hit the metal roll-up door at the loading docks. One loud bang, then another, then silence. I sat there staring at the monitor that showed the hallway leading toward my office. I remember looking at the clock. It was only 2:31. It felt like I'd been dealing with this for hours. Then someone tried my office door. Not hard. Just enough for the handle to move. Once. Twice. Then whoever it was stopped. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. A few seconds later, I heard slow footsteps walking away down the hallway. Those footsteps were probably the worst part of the whole night. Not because they were loud. Because they were calm. Whoever was outside knew I was in there. And they weren't in any hurry. About 10 minutes later, the deputies finally arrived. As soon as I heard them announce themselves over the radio, I unlocked the office and met them at the front entrance. We searched the warehouse together for almost 40 minutes. We never found the person. But we did find where he'd been hiding. Behind a stack of shipping crates was a small space just big enough for someone to sit. There were empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a flashlight. Whoever had been inside hadn't just broken in that night. He'd probably been hiding in the warehouse for at least a day or two. The deputies believed he was waiting for an opportunity to steal high-value electronics after employees arrived in the morning. He must have slipped out through one of the loading docks while we were focused on securing the front of the building. After that incident, my company changed the overnight policy. No more single guard shifts at that warehouse. 2 guards minimum. Looking back, what scares me isn't that someone broke into the building. It's that I'd already walked past that hiding spot twice during my earlier patrols. If he'd decided to step out while I was standing there alone, I honestly don't know how that night would have ended. My name is Jack. I've been working hospital security for a little over 5 years now. If you've ever worked nights in a hospital, you know most people think it's haunted. Personally, I never believed any of that. The things that scare me aren't ghosts. They're the people who don't want to be found. This happened about 2 years ago during one of my overnight shifts. The hospital itself wasn't very large. 3 floors, 1 emergency department, and a medical office building connected by an enclosed hallway. Between midnight and 6 in the morning, the only people usually awake were ER staff, a few nurses, housekeeping, and security. There were supposed to be 2 guards overnight. That night my partner called in sick, so I was covering the entire property by myself until another officer could come in at 4. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't the first time. Around 12:45 a.m., I was finishing my first patrol when the emergency department receptionist called over the radio. "Marcus, can you check the west parking garage? A patient says someone keeps looking into parked cars." That happened every once in a while. Usually it turned out to be someone looking for a ride or a homeless person trying to stay warm. I grabbed my flashlight and drove the security cart over to the garage. The first level was empty except for a few employee vehicles. The second level had maybe 15 cars. I slowly drove every aisle. Nothing. No people. No movement. I radioed back that I couldn't find anyone. As I was heading toward the exit, I noticed something odd. One of the stairwell doors was propped open with a brick. That wasn't normal. Hospital policy required every stairwell door to stay closed because they automatically locked from the outside. I removed the brick and closed the door. Honestly, I figured somebody from maintenance forgot it there earlier. I didn't think much about it. About 20 minutes later, I was back in the security office reviewing camera feeds when the same receptionist called again. "Marcus, that man is back." I switched to the parking garage cameras. She was right. I could see someone walking between the parked cars on level 2. Dark hoodie, hands in his pockets. He wasn't trying door handles. He wasn't breaking into anything. He was just walking slowly, like he was waiting for someone. I zoomed in. The quality wasn't great, but I could tell he kept looking toward the hospital entrance instead of the cars. I radioed dispatch and asked them to notify local police that we had a possible trespasser. Then I headed back to the garage. By the time I got there, he was gone. I checked both stairwells. Nothing. I checked every level. Still nothing. The cameras showed he'd walked toward the north stairwell, but when I opened it, it was completely empty. No footsteps, no doors closing. Nothing. At that point, I actually wondered if the camera delay had thrown me off. Maybe I'd simply arrived too late. I went back inside. About 10 minutes later, one of the nurses stopped me in the hallway. She asked if security had escorted someone upstairs. I told her no. She said she'd just seen a man in a dark hoodie get off the elevator on the 3rd floor. That immediately made my stomach tighten. The elevators required badge access after midnight. Visitors couldn't just ride them. Someone had either followed an employee or someone had let him in. I checked the elevator cameras. Sure enough, there he was, standing alone, head down, not looking at the camera once. The elevator reached the 3rd floor. The doors opened. He stepped out. Then he walked directly into a hallway where one of our cameras had been out of service for nearly a week. I hated that hallway. Not because it was creepy, because it had 2 locked storage rooms, a mechanical room, and a fire exit. Too many places for someone to hide. I started walking toward the 3rd floor while staying on the radio with dispatch. The entire hallway was quiet. Every patient room door was closed. I checked the storage rooms. Locked. Mechanical room. Locked. The fire exit alarm hadn't activated. I was about to head back when I heard something. Very faint. Metal scraping against tile. It sounded like someone slowly dragging a chair. The noise came from the end of the hallway. As I rounded the corner, I expected to see housekeeping. Instead, I saw an empty wheelchair rolling across the hallway. Nobody was pushing it. It slowly bumped into the opposite wall and stopped. I remember standing there trying to make sense of it. Then I looked up. One of the ceiling access panels was hanging open, just slightly. It hadn't been like that earlier. I shined my flashlight up. Nothing. Just darkness above the ceiling tiles. I called my supervisor and asked him if maintenance was scheduled overnight. No. That was all he said. About 30 seconds later, I heard a loud bang above me, then another. It sounded like someone crawling across the ceiling supports, not rats, not pipes. Heavy, deliberate. Moving away from me. I wasn't about to climb into the ceiling after whoever it was. I backed into the nurse's station and told everyone to stay inside until police arrived. Within minutes, officers began searching the building. One of them climbed into the ceiling space near the hallway. About 50 feet down, they found fresh footprints in the insulation. They followed them all the way to another maintenance access panel above the parking garage stairwell. Whoever had been up there had already escaped. The police later discovered something none of us knew. A contractor working on renovations had accidentally left one of the roof access doors unsecured several days earlier. Someone had been entering the hospital through the roof, sleeping above the ceiling during the day, and moving around the building at night. The detectives believed he'd been inside the hospital for at least 3 nights before anyone noticed. What still bothers me isn't that he got inside. It's that I'd stood directly underneath him while checking that hallway. If I'd looked up just a minute earlier, there's a good chance we would have seen each other face to face. I still work hospital security, but now, every time I hear a noise above the ceiling tiles during an overnight shift, I stop walking and I look up first.